Terrific Executive Committee member, Jim Peterson, to put in a quick word.
Well, just ever so briefly, I want on behalf of all of you to thank David and Chris for what I think has been an outstanding annual conference. And one big mea culpa on my part, I failed yesterday to thank somebody who did an outstanding job working with Cindy to put on the Niagara Moot. That's Ian Laird. And Ian, I'm sorry you're not here, but you did an outstanding job for us. You're our secret weapon in Washington. Of the 19 law schools participating in Toronto, 16 came from the U.S. That was great for our balance of payments. I would like to also, in thanking everybody else who's made this possible, give a special vote of thanks to Dan, who has worked tirelessly and who's put so much thought, experience, and imagination into making this happen. Dan, you are the one who is really responsible for everything that's happened here. We're so grateful to you, and our thanks.
All right, well, you know that the way these things usually start is with Jim and Jim, and we've had the Jims represented. Now you get Chris and Crane, and I'm going to turn to David to talk about some of the big themes and the takeaways we've had from today's program, or this conference.
Thanks, Chris. And I've found it a most stimulating day and a half, and that's because we've had such superb presenters, and I can hardly wait for the journal to come out, because I want to go back and reread some of those presentations. So if the editors are here, get after us right away so we don't have to wait a full year to read what happened. Now, there are a lot of, we discussed many different things here, but it seems to me there were certain takeaways or themes which ran right through through our discussions. And the first was the sheer complexity of the issues we're dealing with. We're not just trying to find a substitute for gasoline or a faster turbine for wind power. Energy is such a powerful force and feeds into water and food, exchange rates, all of these kinds of things. So it's an enormously complex field, and we have to have the ability to take this holistic approach, that if we're saying we're going to have more biofuels, what does that mean for food prices? And then to be able to think in that broader sense. The second thing that came through to me very strongly was the sheer extent of change. If we're serious about moving to a different kind of low-carbon economy that we face, the scientific and technological challenges, the institutional challenges, the implications of all these things for different industries, different regions. There are going to be winners, but there are also going to be losers. And the dollar bills that are going to be attached to this kind of change are just huge. We got a little bit of that in the last session, but if you look at building smart grids and all these technologies for automobiles and all of these things we have to do, it's just an enormous amount of capital, and that's something which is going to require a lot more attention, and how we do that. And there is also related to this, always the law of unintended consequences. Are there very many people in this room who aren't wearing a watch? The reason I ask that is that the advent of the mobile phone has had a huge impact on the watch industry. And that's so we will get these unintended effects on the energy side as well. I guess the third thing that came through very strongly is there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to serve this. So therefore, we need policies and approaches that are extraordinarily flexible and allow for a wide range of choices with an array of technologies. We need R&D cutting across many different areas, but there is no silver bullet. And we need many different kinds of policy approaches which allow for this flexibility. And so that whether we're designing taxes or subsidies or competitions with prizes, government procurement or demonstration projects. It's got to be an open-ended kind of thing that doesn't exclude future possibilities that we just haven't thought of today. And we discussed this a bit this morning with betting so heavily on electric vehicles, which may turn out 10 years now to have been a very expensive mistake. So it's got to be open-ended. I think the fourth thing that came across to me was that the key decisions are going to be political decisions, that whether it's on taxes or incentives or standards, on regulations. And we have a real problem today is that our political institutions don't seem able to handle these things in a coherent way. And you combine that with a lack of public understanding, the short-term nature of political decisions. I mean, as a Canadian, I'm always fascinated by the fact that if you get elected to the House of Representatives, you have to run again in 2 years. And so that, if you're a president, you get to your first 2 years of your term. Once the midterm congressionals are over, you're into the start of the presidential re-election cycle. So this has a profound effect. And then you get today, again to affect political decision making, politics is so expensive. We have all of these firms that are just hired to raise money all the time for political parties. And the only way they can raise money all the time is to take extreme positions, to get people scared or agitated, and get a new flow of money coming in to prevent this. And this makes our political system. I think we have to give a lot of thought coming ahead on how we deal with our political institutions and our decision-making process. A fifth thing I think now it was important for me at this meeting, because I think we are all at the point now where climate change is real. We don't need to have more debates. As was said yesterday, people can debate on some of the consequences and whether they will have this effect or that effect. But the reality is that the science of climate change seems to be generally accepted now. So we should be able to move on and start to address it and not spend more years. I mean, there are always going to be people in the wings who will come out, but I remember the debate over tobacco and lung cancer, and you could always find a tame scientist somewhere if the industry paid them enough to come out with some new report which said, well, maybe it's not lung cancer, maybe it's the moon, and do this kind of thing. But I think generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that there's an acceptance. Now, next thing I felt we came away with was that industry needs clear direction. The competitive and innovative nature of industry can come up with a huge array of possibilities to deal with a problem, but they have to know what the framework is in which they're operating. If we want people to have cars which get a fuel efficiency standard of a certain level, which is much better than today, set the standard. Don't try to tell the car companies what kind of car they should build. Just create and these standards and rules have to have long-term stability. You can't change them every 2 years, else have no effect. But I think it's the market needs a framework, but then the market will have, through its own energy and competitive activity, has a capacity to try a whole variety of possible solutions. And we see the same thing in standards for efficient refrigerators and appliances, different types of buildings, and all of these kinds of things. The seventh point that I thought did come through, I was a bit surprised, but also gratified, that I think people are now prepared to give a carbon tax more serious consideration. I don't think that was true 2 years ago. But as we look through what are the alternatives, we're learning more about the problems with cap and trade. And we're learning that from a whole variety of sources, including from industry. Well, what's the price of carbon going to be? How do we do that? How do we create the incentives for people to change their behavior? How do you create the incentives by creating a potential market for new technologies if you don't have a price on carbon? So I don't think it's unanimity on a carbon tax, but I think the weight of opinion is moving in that direction. I think one thing else we heard a lot about, and especially last night from Ambassador Jacobson, is that North American cooperation makes a huge amount of sense. The shared standards, goals, cooperation will allow us to access much wider choices, and also, because we're concerned about unemployment and future competitiveness, increases the possibility of creating an industrial base in North America that has innovative new products, technologies, and softwares, and so forth. So that there is a great need to discourage Buy America, to discourage the Ontario domestic content approach, to deal with those kinds of short-term policies where politicians like to think, well, we're going to do this, but I can sell it because we're going to keep everybody else out and we'll keep all the jobs locally. That isn't going to work. Ninth, I think there are some things we can do now cooperatively across the border that will help. Now, we heard a bit of discussion about natural gas during yesterday and today, and I've seen some very good research. I didn't know this until a few weeks ago. This came out of the Canadian government, that heavy-duty diesel trucks emit 30% of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. If you could do something about these great tractor trailers that go on our major highways, you'd make a dent in greenhouse gas emissions. Compressed natural gas or liquid natural gas is one way to do that. We could build in Quebec, Ontario, and the Great Lakes states on most heavily traveled traffic arteries for trucking, fueling stations which would allow trucks to access natural gas. That's something we could do together, and so that's one thing it's just one example of a possibility of cooperation, collaboration, which would have a real effect. And the technology exists. Diesel is not bad, but diesel in lowering greenhouse gas emissions, but this is better. Diesel has, as one of the slides showed this morning, has SOx and NOx emissions, which natural gas doesn't. Finally, I think that other point that came out is that government does have a large role to play in funding pre-competitive R&D and funding demonstration projects and in new technologies, quite often being the first customer. The identification of where government should best play the role should come from, in my view, from the industry and also from the engineering and scientific communities. They're the ones who are able to. So, you know, we've got a long way. People sort of say, well, we've got carbon capture and storage, and that'll save all our coal plants. As I said yesterday, there is no commercial system for carbon capture and storage. That's an area where cooperatively we can do something together, where we still need a lot of fairly early stage research and where we need to help fund demonstration projects. One more example I can think of is that we're building all this renewable power capacity, but we don't always need it. How can we develop systems that store electricity? You know, that's a huge challenge. Anyway, those were 10 things that I got out of this. Everybody will have their own 10-point list, but those are my 10. And as I said at the beginning, I'm anxious to see that journal of proceedings out as fast as possible. And finally, the fun for me in this project was the opportunity to work with Chris and Dan and to enjoy all our exchanges as we tried to shape this conference and deal with changes in directions or cancellations and all these other things. So it's been a lot of fun as well.
It does feel like it's been part of a conversation that we've been having for the last year, and it is an exciting sort of grand finale for us. Yeah. I don't have a lot to add to what David had said. He summed it up brilliantly, I think. But let's come back to the theme of the conference: energy security, climate change, common approach. And it seems to me that one of the things you've got out of this conference, and you've captured it, is that we have a common problem of energy security. And our energy security is getting worse, and part of the reason is policy, which is sending signals all over. Are we going to use oil? Are we going to use feed-in tariffs and renewables? We've got a lot of mixed signals out there. And the question of how we're going to meet our energy needs, given that they're growing, is a little bit up in the air in both countries. Secondly, climate change. There's a lot of desire to deal with climate change, but a variety of approaches. And we're not sure whether we're going to price carbon and so on and so forth. So then it seems to me that we do have a common approach, and it's pretty chaotic. And not to be pessimistic, but to be optimistic, how do we get around these mixed signals? It'll be people like you. The legal community is untangled best intended policies that are very hard to follow through on for industry and for citizens for a long time. And even in the case of some of the NGOs we heard from, Danielle talking to us about what Pembina is doing, the legal system provides the way for those people who are more concerned about the policy direction to advocate. And so we have a rich area here. Cusley is going to be at the center of it, and you all are going to be at the center of it, getting from where we are, which is a lot of confusion and policy chaos, to where we want to go, about which there's a lot of consensus, a more efficient energy and improving climate environment, and it's all going to depend on you. So I hope that this last couple of days was stimulating, provocative, and hopefully in the future enriching, not just for our current members, but for the students who are here, who will hopefully be on the gravy train to pay back all their student loans for quite a long time. Now, we've gone from Jim and Jim to Chris and Crane, and now I think if we can, we'll turn to Dan and Dunn. Dan, tell us how we get out of here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, just to be brief, there is a gourmet box lunch just across the way. With that, these proceedings are adjourned. Thank you.